Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for the season finale of Loki: Glorious Purpose. And this is my favorite episode of the season, and I think that you could just watch this one and forget everything else going on in the season. That is just how poorly paced everything pretty much was done. They somehow were able to encapsulate everything that needed to happen in this one, and I was just like, wow, this episode does better than everything else that's been going on before. If there was like a reconfiguring of this season, you could essentially have just done it as this episode. Now granted, I understand if you don't agree with me and you've been fine with this season so far. It's just, this answered more questions, got us a conflict resolution, got us some more information that needed to be done before the end episode, and actually had better kind of moments and did a really good job of doing Loki's kind of story. Sylvie still got the shaft on some stuff because, like, there could have been better kind of philosophical arguments that go on throughout this episode, especially in regards to what Loki is kind of going on with her. And they just dropped the ball on it. We'll get to it when we get to it. So, I could essentially say that this is done in a kind of 3-act structure. We get them, Loki pretty much doing the stuff with the time slipping, and again, even though we get more answers after certain kind of points about the time slipping, it still doesn't change the fact that it's presented like, hey, this was a problem. It's now fixed. Now it's coming back again. What? I don't like the execution and the pacing of what goes on with that. If it's supposed to be a through line, it should be a through line throughout the season. That's kind of how TV shows work. You don't just kind of randomly start and stop things like Supernatural did in its final season. Granted, that's a good bad case scenario, and also Game of Thrones, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the trifecta. So, here he is attempting to figure out how to fix the loom. And we pretty much see Timely fucking spaghettified so many different kind of times, but this actually does the whole work of utilizing the whole time concept very well. If all of the episodes utilized the time concept like this one, it would have been a complete game changer. I could compare this to like the final episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, where Picard is dealing with 3 different kind of time periods, and this is Loki kind of dealing with a similar scenario. His Kobayashi Maru, pretty much his unwinnable scenario, and how he's supposed to kind of like figure out how to fix it. So this first part deals with him doing the stuff with the loom, trying to get faster and running through kind of Groundhog Day with his time slipping, failing and going back, getting to a certain point where he learns enough about physics. He spends centuries learning this stuff from OB and learning all this stuff, and then we see him do it, and he's able to execute on the plan, but it still fails anyway. And Timely is, it's great because you see him pretty much talking people through, and they're like, what the, like, Mobius is even going to him, it's like, what the fuck is going on with you right now? What the hell? He's like, I got this, I got this, I got this. And it's really cool because this really does showcase that this is a hero Loki throughout all the different kind of changes that he has gone through as this variant, which we've seen different kind of incarnations also in the comics. This was a good one for this. So he goes through, Timely is able to get out there, we see him giving affirmations and everything, telling Timely not to put down the throughput multiplier, and because it'll roll off the edge. He's gone through so many different kind of things, and just picking up on those little things is a nice little a nice thing for you to be able to kind of like get through. But he does it, he puts it out, but then we find out that it's not going to work, and that he's talking about how it's a scaling problem, how it can't scale infinitely, and then he's trying to figure out what to do now. Now, the second part deals with him trying to figure out as much kind of information as possible and where he could kind of change up what's kind of going on. So it's like, he has to go back to the source. And this is where he then starts conversing with He Who Remains. And this was a nice thing of figuring out what's been kind of going on. This is where we learned that evidently He Who Remains was able to instigate the time slipping with Loki, and Loki essentially gaining time powers and becoming a time god. That becomes important later on in the episode. Talking about and he's trying to figure out what's going on. Have you figured out how to pause time yet? And he's like, maybe this is the first time we've had this conversation. But laying out that his variants are already in the wind and everything like that with the whole sacred timeline, and that the time loom is a failsafe. If it gets to a certain point, it just auto-deletes all the branches no matter what, save for the sacred timeline. So trying to save it, and it will also delete the TVA as well. So trying to save it is kind of a moot point. He's got two options to either kill Sylvie or somehow destroy the time loom. And we see Loki then go through this whole thing again of trying to talk Sylvie out of it and being unable to. Trying to pretty much understand how these anchor points kind of go. So then he starts kind of traveling and trying to figure out, because He Who Remains starts bringing up this whole concept of, okay, the hard choices. He made this system because he thought of it as the only kind of system that would work and contain his variant to make sure that they wouldn't do their time war and destroy all of existence. However, that does not excuse all of the horrible things that he's done of destroying these timelines and hunting variants like Sylvie. However, we then get to Loki trying to figure out this decision of what to kind of like go for. Let's see. Like he has to either save the loom by killing Sylvie or figuring out kind of another way. Then he decides to pretty much go through, he converses with Mobius. He's like, how do you understand the kind of hard choices to make? And how Mobius, like, these two hunters went. They were supposed to prune this kid, but it was an 8-year-old kid. The one dude hesitated, but then all these variants and everything was going to shit afterwards, so his partner did it. And Loki asks him how he kind of felt about that and how his partner felt about having to kind of do that. He's like, it's hard living with that burden, like glorious purpose. That's like, it's more like, it's more burden than glorious. You know what I mean? Of having to make those kind of decisions. And it was a nice kind of conversation to have Loki and Mobius have. And then we get to the shitty one of Loki and Sylvie. He comes up to her pretty much at the end and is able to stop time and converse with her before she's like auto-deleted at the one kind of end point. And he's like, I either save the loom, but that means killing you. And she's like, fuck this thing. It should be freedom for all. It's like, but that's not the choice. It's either like we destroy this thing and somehow everything, like a war that destroys everything occurs and everybody's dead. And Loki rightfully brings up, what's the point of freedom if they're all dead? It's like, oh, they can die fighting. It's like, oh, there are so many different kind of avenues that they could have taken for her to actually have a nice philosophical discussion of freedom versus control, of what kind of goes on. She has seen the proof that the universe goes into fucking spaghetti mode, thread mode, of where there's no fighting that, and that nobody's been able to kind of fight at this point. She's giving no kind of options that really make anything other than submitting to He Who Remains' rule throughout utilizing the temporal loom to take out the rest of the branches. There has been no showcased option of people being able to stabilize time at this point. Loki's the only one that can at least affect time and move through it at a free will, and also pausing it as well, which factors into pretty much his choice at the end. But it is the dumbest fucking debate argument I have seen, because Loki's almost handed on a silver platter of kill Sylvie. However, I don't believe in He Who Remains as kind of option. It was the one that worked best for him. And the way Loki's option at the end is the one that kind of works best for him, even though it kind of screws him over. I do believe that there are certain kind of instances that you could probably figure out a way to create a different kind of system. But it also works within his Norse roots. but it was just mind-boggling, the stupidity of like, oh, at least they'll die fighting. Fighting what? Like, we haven't even gotten to a point where they can actually fight through any kind of, like, outside force. This is reality. I'm sorry I'm harping on it, but it's a giant central conflict part of this and feeds into Loki's decision of his third path. So, we see him pretty much get back to the temporal loom kind of place, and instead of sending out Victor Timely, he decides to initiate his kind of third choice plan. He goes out, and we see that the time radiation is not affecting him and blasting him out of existence. I would have preferred some kind of explanation, but it's probably hand-waved at this point that He Who Remains has pretty much given him temporal powers and time kind of powers, so that's kind of what it is, but it then blasts off his clothes, and he then turns into a Loki kind of outfit. He's being a god for them, and especially for Sylvie. And he then goes through and somehow destroys the temporal loom without blasting apart the TVA and everything. Granted, down to his new, not really explained time powers. Again, I don't need complete explanation, but he has been moved up beyond even God of Mischief magic powers. This is controlling a basic tenet of reality by himself. Okay? This is stuff that you utilize the Time Stone for. So, that's a big kind of power boost, especially what he's able to do towards this end, which kind of potentially might echo stuff from the 2015 Secret Kind of Wars. We'll kind of see what goes on. But he starts grabbing and pulling all of these threads together from the disparate realities and utilizing his magic / maybe temporal powers to revitalize these dead timelines. And we see him going through, and it's very effective as we see him becoming the central anchor point for the entire multiverse, and how lonely he is as he now gets that throne that he so wanted in the past, but he doesn't even want this one. This is the one he has chosen to protect his friends and those that he loves. And that is a very different Loki than one saying he's burned with glorious purpose. And he then gets everything and creates essentially Yggdrasil, the world tree, and we see that it kind of is able to scale better than the temporal loom with all of these branches and all of these roots, and that was actually really kind of cool, and I liked that turning and factoring it into Norse mythology that way. But we see that Loki is now by himself and in the throne that He Who Remains is used to sit in. That was an effective kind of thing with the End of Time Citadel thing. I'm like, okay, really cool. Loki's work in this episode, phenomenal. I loved what they did with his character. I loved him having his conversation with He Who Remains, with Mobius. Sylvie's was just, what? That could have been a lot better. And then we see the kind of aftermath. Everything's working. We see the new kind of thing instead of the loom and the sacred timeline in one thing. We see the branching and everything. She has to go in and figure out what the TVA is supposed to do and how, as an organization, they're supposed to run now. With the B-15 going with all that, Casey gonna save a seat. Figure out what's going on with Mobius, saying that they got the report from the adjacent realm with the quantum realm and everything with Kang, because they're keeping an eye on the variants. Mobius then looks into his past and everything, goes to kind of see it, slowly being like, yeah, kind of wish... Somebody's like, yeah, I kind of wish Loki were here. It's like, you could figure out some better kind of way than just him sitting there anchor pointing the damn thing. There's got to be a better system than, hey, I'm just going to feed through time like this, or having somebody sit there as an anchor point. It creates another weak spot, another failure point. Even though we see that Loki is happy and kind of misty-eyed from that everybody's like happy and working towards their own kind of goals and everything. We see B-15 going into the war room, and we see everybody conversing and a lot of different kind of characters in the TVA. We see that Renslayer is at the end of time, pretty much in the destroyed TVA, and that Alioth, Alioth is coming to eat her ass, I guess. Ms. Minutes is even brought back, and B-15's like, are we sure she's not going to kill us? It's like, well, that's with anybody, pretty much. I mean, granted, she's built as an AI that went fucking homicidal, but that's the question you have to ask for anybody, or anything, really. Let's see here. That they have a new guidebook, and we see that Timely does not receive the TVA guidebook, as is past, and that's where it ends. We'll have to see. I would not really be up for another season of this. I did not like how overall this whole season was executed. I think there's a lot of time wasting, a lot of not understanding how to create this show with their own objective, because I got to this last episode and had the most enjoyment because it executed on its premise properly, utilized its characters and time effectively, and pretty much was like, hey, we really didn't need the rest of the season. And even though it was the longest, I liked how it was structured in 3 kind of parts and how it worked out and was paced. It's really kind of rare to be able to see an episode that goes, if they just reconfigured this, we could have had a slightly longer special, kind of similar in the vein of Werewolf by Night, and have it work better than what we've got here. Because I like the characters, I like the actors, the content just went fuckballs wild, and pacing and execution was just all over the place for me. It was nuts, but I do believe that this was the best episode of Season 2, and it was a really good episode, even though there was stupidity that kind of went in. The tension between Loki and He Who Remains, and trying to figure out the optimal kind of solution was really kind of cool, and echoed Star Trek's kind of episode with Picard and Q, and being in 3 time periods at once and kind of trying to coordinate between them. And I love being able to be to have that kind of reminiscent here as Loki's going through all these different things, challenging himself to try and figure out this problem and see how his solution works out. And I did like seeing all of the kind of worlds in the branches of the world tree. That was just a really nice... You don't have to always link it back to Norse mythology, but when you're using Norse characters like this, it's really nice to do it, and especially when it's executed well. Now, I believe it's executed well. If you don't agree with that, that's cool, no problems. If you think this episode sucked and completely blew off the season, I get that. It's fine. I think that it worked. I enjoyed myself. I was just like, why the fuck did I have to go through those other episodes when this could have just been better, well done as its own kind of condensed story? Like, if you reconfigured certain kind of stuff without dealing with, like, the whole fixing this time slipping and then getting it back and just setting up the temporal loom and trying to get somebody to come there, it just goes to show that this story was stretched out way too much. At least for me. If that's not the case for you, that's cool. So, those are my opinions on the episode. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.